had spent the last 10 years alone, though I never thought of myself as lonely. Life had taken its twists and turns, some fair, others cruel, and after my divorce I learned to build a quiet, content routine. Days were filled with work, books, gardening, and occasional outings with friends, and though it wasn't the most exciting existence, it was enough. But there were times when I would sit on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, and watch the sun dip below the horizon. That quiet hum of the evening would remind me that my house was too still, the silence more telling than peaceful. I suppose my son Liam noticed it too. At 23, Liam was everything I had hoped he would be. Kind, thoughtful, and a touch more perceptive than any young man his age had the right to be. He had moved out for college years ago, and now, juggling a full-time job, he visited me only when he could, though he always made those visits count. So when he showed up that Friday afternoon, his bright grin practically lighting up the doorway, I knew he had something up his sleeve. "Mom," he said, stepping inside with a flourish, holding an envelope like it was a golden ticket. "Guess what I got us?" I frowned, laughing softly. "I don't know, Liam. A discount coupon for the supermarket." "Better," he said, ignoring my sarcasm. "2 tickets to the Maldives. We're leaving next week." Froze mid-step. "The Maldives?" "Yes. You know, crystal blue water, white sandy beaches. The Maldives." His excitement was infectious, and I blinked at him, stunned. "Liam, we can't just." "We can," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Mom, you haven't taken a vacation in years. You deserve this." "But it must have cost a fortune." "I've been saving," he said simply, shrugging as though it were no big deal. "Come on. You've always dreamed of a trip like this. Let me do this for you." For the first time in years I was speechless. My son, my sweet boy who had grown into such a responsible man, had planned this for me. The following week passed in a blur of planning and packing. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too extravagant, too spontaneous. Yet when the plane touched down in the Maldives and I stepped off into a warmth I hadn't felt in years, sunlight, sea air, and something else I couldn't quite name, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. Our little bungalow sat perched above the ocean, wooden planks stretching out over turquoise waters that looked too surreal to be real. From the balcony, I could watch the waves roll gently beneath us, hear the soft murmur of the sea that seemed to speak in hushed secrets. Liam was thrilled, his energy uncontainable as he dragged me snorkeling the very first morning. I laughed more than I could remember in recent memory, tumbling into the water in my awkward flippers, my son teasing me mercilessly. As we floated together beneath the sun-dappled surface, the world opened up into an expanse of color. Fish that looked like stained glass, corals that seemed to glow, and the shimmering blue that stretched endlessly into the deep. "See, Mom," Liam said when we surfaced, his hair dripping and his grin wide. "Worth it, right?" "More than worth it," I admitted, breathless from the beauty of it all. That evening, as the sun painted the horizon in hues of pink and gold, Liam and I sat on the beach, our toes buried in the cool sand. I turned to look at him, this grown man beside me who I still remembered as the little boy who needed my hand to cross the street. "You know, Liam," I said softly, "you didn't have to do all of this for me." "I wanted to," he replied, gazing at the waves. "You've spent so much of your life taking care of everyone else. It's about time someone took care of you." I swallowed the lump in my throat, tears threatening to blur my vision. "I don't know what I did to deserve a son like you." He smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You did everything, Mom." The days rolled by like a dream. We kayaked across the shimmering lagoon, tried our hand at paddleboarding, where I failed miserably and ended up in the water more times than I could count, and ate dinner under a canopy of stars that stretched so far they made the world feel endless. One afternoon, Liam convinced me to take a boat out to a sandbank, a tiny island no bigger than a living room. Just us, a picnic, and the vastness of the ocean. "Feel that?" Liam asked, lying back on the sand. "There's nothing here to worry about. Just this moment." I closed my eyes, the sun warm on my skin, and let the sound of the waves wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. My heart, which had been quiet for so long, felt full of love, gratitude, and a joy I hadn't realized I was missing. Liam had given me a gift I didn't even know I needed. Not just a trip to a far-off paradise, but a reminder that life was still filled with beauty, that I was still capable of laughter, and that I wasn't as alone as I had let myself believe. On our last evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset fade into twilight, Liam turned to me with a soft smile. "I think we should make this a tradition," he said. "Maybe not the Maldives every year, but something." Just as I smiled, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "I'd like that." And I meant it. For the first time in 10 years I felt seen, not as a mother or as someone who had to be strong, but simply as me. And I had my son to thank for that. Our return from the Maldives felt bittersweet. Those golden days, so full of laughter, peace, and the hum of waves, stayed with me long after we touched down at home. I thought life would settle back into its regular rhythm, but something had shifted. It wasn't something I could pinpoint at first. Liam stayed longer than he usually did. His visits, which once felt like stolen hours, stretched into days. I loved having him around, though it surprised me. "Work can wait a bit," he said when I asked about his sudden lingering. "You know, I miss being here with you." His words, simple yet heartfelt, warmed me more than I cared to admit. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed his presence, the clatter of his shoes on the floor, the way his voice carried through the quiet house. He filled the spaces I'd gotten used to navigating alone. That first week back, Liam threw himself into fixing things I didn't even realize needed repair. "Mom, when was the last time you checked this porch railing?" "It's loose," he said one morning, tools in hand. I laughed as I watched him huffing, sweating under the mid-morning sun. "I didn't notice." "Well, you don't have to notice. That's what I'm here for." Liam spent that day resecuring the railing, hammering nails into place with determined force. He moved on to the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the loose hinge on the back door, even the overgrown hedges in the garden. "You don't have to do all this," I told him, leaning against the doorway with a cup of coffee. "I want to," he said simply, wiping his brow. "It's the least I can do." I couldn't argue with him. I like seeing him in action, taking care of the house in ways I had long ignored or struggled with on my own. There was something grounding about it, something reassuring. Later that day he surprised me with flowers. Nothing extravagant. A small bouquet of daisies and lilies, picked up from a local stand, but the gesture caught me off guard. "You didn't need to do this, Liam," I said softly, placing the flowers in a vase. His smile was warm, his tone light. "Why not? You deserve flowers. Every woman does." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks and quickly turned away, busying myself with arranging the stems. It was silly, I thought, to feel so flustered, but something about his words stayed with me. That night, as we sat together watching a movie, Liam sprawled out on the couch beside me like he used to when he was younger. The familiarity of it all should have been comforting, but it felt different. "You're quiet," he said suddenly, nudging me with his elbow. "Just thinking," I replied, not meeting his eyes. "About what?" He hesitated. "About how nice it's been, having you here. The house feels different with you in it." "Good different, I hope," he teased, flashing me that boyish grin of his. "Good different," I agreed, smiling back. He stayed close that evening, lingering just on the edge of my space in a way I couldn't ignore. I felt his presence more acutely than usual, the brush of his arm when he reached for the popcorn, the warmth of his laugh when I fumbled a line from the movie. The space between us felt charged, though I couldn't explain why. The days passed, and our closeness grew. Liam became my shadow, helping me with everything. Groceries, fixing things, cooking dinner. He'd stand beside me at the counter, chopping vegetables with surprising precision. "Where'd you learn to cook so well?" I asked one evening. "College," he said with a shrug. "You didn't raise me to live on instant noodles, you know." I smiled, shaking my head. "Well, I'm proud of you, Liam. You've become a good man." His hands paused, the knife stilling mid-slice. When he looked up at me, his gaze was softer than usual, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That means a lot, Mom," he said quietly. I felt something in my chest tighten, something I couldn't put a name to. I turned away before he could see the emotion on my face. It wasn't just the help around the house or his unexpected compliments that lingered with me. It was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His gaze felt different, lingering, observant, almost admiring. One afternoon I stood in the garden, pruning some overgrown roses. I hadn't realized Liam was watching me from the porch until he spoke. "You look so happy out here," he said. Startled, I turned, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "It's peaceful. Keeps me busy." "You look beautiful when you smile," he added, his tone soft, almost hesitant. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Don't look so shocked," he teased quickly, as if to lighten the moment. "It's true." I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off, but his words stayed with me long after I'd put the shears away. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Liam found me sitting on the porch swing, a cup of tea warming my hands. He dropped into the seat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine as he stretched out with a sigh. "You've done so much for me, Mom," he said suddenly, his voice low. "It's what mothers do," I replied, smiling softly. "No, I mean it. You've sacrificed so much, given me everything. I don't think I tell you enough how much I appreciate you." I blinked back the sting of tears, caught off guard by his sudden sincerity. "You don't need to say it. I know." "Well, I want to say it," he insisted. "You deserve to hear it. You deserve more." There was a pause, one of those heavy silences that felt like it could tip into something unspoken. Liam turned to look at me then, his eyes earnest, searching mine. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The hum of the crickets, the faint rustle of the leaves, it all faded into the background. I felt my heart quicken under his gaze, and I quickly looked away, sipping my tea as though it might ground me. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he murmured. The words, so simple yet loaded with meaning, settled between us. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing at all. As the days slipped into weeks, Liam continued to linger in my world, filling the empty spaces I hadn't realized were there. His presence was comforting, yet there was an unspoken shift between us, something I couldn't name, but could feel in every lingering glance, every thoughtful touch, every word left hanging in the air. And though I knew I should pull back, keep things as they were, I couldn't help but draw closer to him too. The days turned into weeks, and Liam stayed. He made excuses, work from home projects, a much-needed break. But I didn't question it. I liked having him around. The silence in the house had been replaced by his presence. His voice, his footsteps, his laughter. It was a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. He was attentive in ways that made me pause. If I looked tired, he would take over whatever I was doing, cooking, chores, or even just carrying groceries. He made me feel seen, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "You're working too hard," he'd say with a shake of his head, pulling the broom out of my hands or urging me to sit. I couldn't help but laugh at him. "I'm fine, Liam. I'm used to doing things myself." "You shouldn't have to," he'd reply softly. It was in these small moments that our bond deepened, though I tried to ignore the quiet voice in my mind warning me that something had shifted. One evening after dinner we sat together in the living room. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing a soft glow around the room. I curled up in my armchair with a book while Liam sprawled across the couch. He watched me, his gaze lingering until I could feel the heat of it, even without looking up. "You've been staring at me for 10 minutes, I said lightly, not taking my eyes off the page. "Maybe I like watching you," he replied softly, his tone warm but serious. I looked up then, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. The playfulness that usually colored his words was gone, replaced by something deeper, something I couldn't deny. "What's gotten into you?" I teased, trying to laugh it off. He didn't smile. Instead, he sat up slowly, his elbows resting on his knees as he looked at me intently. "Mom," he started, his voice low, hesitant. Something in the way he said it made my pulse quicken. "What is it?" I asked gently, my heart suddenly beating faster. He looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts before meeting my gaze again. I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, he began. His voice steady but quiet. But I need you to know. I care about you more than I should, maybe. You're not just my mother. You're everything to me. The room seemed to still around us. I stared at him, my breath caught in my chest, unable to process what I had just heard. Liam, I whispered, but he shook his head, cutting me off gently. Let me finish, he said softly. I know this isn't what you'd expect to hear from me, but it's the truth. These past few weeks, I've seen you in a way I haven't before. You're strong, beautiful, kind, everything I admire. And I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel this way. His confession hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I opened my mouth to say something, to tell him he was being silly or to downplay his words, but no sound came. My thoughts were a jumble, my heart racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. Liam stood then, closing the distance between us. He crouched down beside my chair, looking up at me with such tenderness that I felt myself softening, my defenses crumbling. I'm not asking for anything, he said gently. I just needed you to know. For a moment, neither of us moved. His hand reached out tentatively, brushing against mine where it rested on the arm of the chair. I didn't pull away. Liam, I said again, though this time my voice was softer. He tilted his head, searching my face. If you don't feel the same, it's okay. Just tell me. I didn't know what to say. My thoughts and emotions tangled into a mess I couldn't unravel. But there was one thing I couldn't deny. The way my heart fluttered under his gaze, the way I had started to rely on his presence, his words, his warmth. I don't know what I feel, I admitted finally. Liam gave me a small smile, his thumb brushing softly over my knuckles. That's okay too. He leaned forward then, so slowly it was as though he was giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. Before I could think, his lips pressed lightly against mine. The kiss was soft, hesitant, fleeting, yet it sent a shiver through me that I couldn't ignore. When he pulled back, he searched my face for any sign of rejection. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. Instead, I looked away, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. This is too much, Liam. He nodded, standing up slowly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push. I shook my head, feeling the need to reassure him. No, it's not that. I need to think. He smiled softly, his eyes kind. Take all the time you need. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Liam's words echoed in my mind. His confession, the tenderness of his touch, the kiss that had left me breathless. I knew it was wrong to dwell on it, yet I couldn't push it away. The next morning, Liam found me sitting on the porch, my head resting against the back of the chair. He smiled as he approached, a mug of tea in his hands. You look tired, he said, sitting down beside me. Just didn't sleep well, I replied with a small smile. Here, he said, setting the mug down. Let me help. Before I could ask what he meant, he moved behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. Liam, what are you doing? I asked, half turning to look at him. Relax, he said with a chuckle. Just trust me. You're always tense. Let me help. I hesitated for a moment before leaning back into the chair. His fingers began to move gently over my scalp, kneading away the tension I hadn't even realized was there. You work too hard, he murmured softly as his hands worked their magic. I closed my eyes, letting out a quiet sigh as his fingers traced soothing patterns along my hairline, the back of my neck. Felt nice, comforting. And yet, there was something else too, something deeper that I didn't dare name. Better, he asked quietly after a while. I nodded, unable to find the words to describe how his touch made me feel. When I opened my eyes, he was sitting beside me again, watching me with that same soft expression. You deserve to feel cared for, he said gently. The words struck a chord deep inside me. For so long I had carried everything on my own shoulders, never asking for help, never letting anyone in. And here he was, my son, yet more than that now, seeing me, really seeing me, in a way I hadn't let anyone see me in years. I reached out instinctively, taking his hand in mine. "Thank you, Liam." He squeezed my fingers gently, his smile warm. "Anytime." We sat there together, the quiet of the morning wrapping around us like a cocoon. I didn't know where this path would lead us, or if I even had the courage to walk it, but for now, I let myself lean into the moment, into him,